600 hours. The only lights in the laboratory shone on the bench, next to a row of neatly bottled specimens. Squid, shrimps, giant squid eggs. He touched the bottles absently. He turned on the laboratory monitor and punched buttons until he saw Beth, downstairs on the video. Beth was working at the main D-cylinder console. To one side he saw Harry, still lying unconscious. "Norman, can you hear me?" he said aloud. "Yes, Beth, I hear you." "Norman, you are acting irresponsibly. You're a menace to this entire expedition." Was that true? He wondered. He didn't think he was a menace to the expedition. It didn't feel true to him. But how often in his life has he ever confronted patients who refused to acknowledge what was happening in their lives? Even trivial examples. A man, another professor at the university, who was terrified of elevators, but who steadfastly insisted he always took the stairs because it was good exercise. The man would climb 15-story buildings. He would decline appointments in taller buildings. He arranged his entire life to accommodate a problem he would not admit he had. The problem remained concealed from him until he finally had a heart attack. Or the woman who was exhausted from years of caring for her disturbed daughter. She gave her daughter a bottle of sleeping pills because she said the girl needed a rest. The girl committed suicide. Or the novice sailor who cheerfully packed his family off on a sailing excursion to Catalina in a gale, nearly killing them all. Dozens of examples came to mind. It was a psychological truism, this blindness about self. Did he imagine that he was immune? 3 years ago, there had been a minor scandal when one of the assistant professors in the psychology department had committed suicide, sticking a gun in his mouth over the Labor Day weekend. There had been headlines for that one. "Psych professor kills self. Colleagues express surprise. Says deceased was always happy." The dean of the faculty, embarrassed in his fundraising, had berated Norman about that incident. But the difficult truth was that psychology had severe limitations. Even with professional knowledge and the best of intentions, there remained an enormous amount you never knew about your closest friends, your colleagues, your wives and husbands and children. And your ignorance about yourself was even greater than that. Self-awareness was the most difficult of all. Few people attained it. Or perhaps nobody attained it. "Norman, are you there?" "Yes, Beth." "I think you're a good person, Norman." He said nothing. He just watched her on the monitor. "I think you have integrity and that you believe in telling the truth. This is a difficult moment for you, to face reality about yourself. I know your mind is struggling now to find excuses, to blame someone else. But I don't think you can do it, Norman. Harry couldn't do it, but you can. I think you can admit the hard truth, that so long as you remain conscious, the expedition is menaced." He felt the strength of her conviction, heard the quiet force of her voice. As Beth spoke, it felt almost as if her eyes were clothing being draped over his body. He began to see things her way. She was so calm. She must be right. Her ideas had such power. Her thoughts had such power. "Beth, have you been in the sphere?" "No, Norman. That's your mind, trying to evade the point again. I haven't been in the sphere. You have." He honestly couldn't remember going into the sphere. He had no recollection of it. And when Harry had been in the sphere, he remembered afterwards. Why would Norman forget? Why would he block it? "You're a psychologist, Norman," she was saying. "You, of all people, do not want to admit you have a shadow side. You have a professional stake in believing in your own mental health. Of course you'll deny it. He didn't think so. But how to resolve it? How to determine if she was right or not? His mind wasn't working well. His cut knee throbbed painfully. At least there was no doubt about that. His injured knee was real. Reality testing. That was how to resolve it, he thought. Reality testing. What was the objective evidence that Norman had gone into the sphere? They had made tapes of everything that had occurred in the habitat. If Norman had gone to the sphere many hours ago, somewhere there was a tape showing him in the airlock, alone, getting dressed, slipping away. Beth should be able to show him that tape. Where was the tape? In the submarine, of course. It would have long ago been taken to the submarine. Norman himself might have taken it when he made his excursion to the sub. No objective evidence. Norman, give up. Please, for all our sakes. Perhaps she was right, he thought. She was so sure of herself. If he was evading the truth, if he was putting the expedition in jeopardy, then he had to give himself up and let her put him under. Could he trust her to do that? He would have to. There wasn't any choice. It must be me, he thought. It must be. The thought was so horrible to him. That, in itself, was suspicious. He was resisting it so violently. Not a good sign, he thought. Too much resistance. Norman. Okay, Beth. Will you do it? Don't push. Just give me a minute, will you? Sure, Norman. Of course. He looked at the video recorder next to the monitor. He remembered how Beth had used this recorder to play the same tape, again and again. The tape in which the sphere had opened by itself. The tape was now lying on the counter beside the recorder. He pushed the tape into the slot, clicked the recorder on. Why bother to look at it now, he thought. You're just delaying. You're wasting time. The screen flickered, and he waited for the familiar image of Beth eating cake, her back to the monitor. But this was a different tape. This was a direct monitor feed showing the sphere. The gleaming sphere just sitting there. He watched for a few seconds, but nothing happened. The sphere was immobile, as always. Polished, perfect, immobile. He watched a while longer, but there was nothing to see. Norman, if I open the hatch now, will you come down quietly? Yes, Beth. He sighed, sat back in the chair. How long would he be unconscious? A little less than 6 hours. It would be okay. But, in any case, Beth was right. He had to give himself up. Norman, why are you watching that tape? He looked around quickly. Was there a video camera in the room allowing her to see him? Yes, high up in the ceiling, next to the upper hatch. Why are you watching that tape, Norman? It was here. Who said you could watch that tape? Nobody, Norman said. It was just here. Turn the tape off, Norman. Turn it off now. She didn't sound so calm anymore. What's the matter, Beth? Turn the damn tape off, Norman! He was about to ask why, but then he saw her, Beth, enter the video image, stand next to the sphere. Beth closed her eyes and clenched her fist. The convoluted grooves of the sphere parted, revealing blackness. And as he watched, Beth stepped inside the sphere. and the door of the sphere closed behind her. "You goddamn men," Beth said in a tight, angry voice. "You're all the same. You can't leave well enough alone, none of you." "You lied to me, Beth." "Why did you watch the tape? I begged you not to watch that tape. It could only hurt you to watch that tape, Norman." She wasn't angry anymore. Now she was pleading, near tears. She was undergoing rapid emotional shifts, unstable, unpredictable. And she was in control of the habitat. "Beth, I'm sorry, Norman. I can't trust you anymore." "Beth, I'm turning you off now, Norman. I'm not going to listen to Beth, wait, you anymore. I know how dangerous you are. I saw what you did to Harry. How you twisted the facts so that it was Harry's fault. Oh yes, it was Harry's fault by the time you got through. And now you want to make it Beth's fault, don't you? Well, let me tell you, Norman, you won't be able to do it because I have shut you off, Norman. I can't hear your soft, convincing words. I can't hear your manipulation. So don't waste your breath, Norman." He stopped the tape. The monitor now showed Beth at the console in the room below, pushing buttons on the console. "Beth," he said. She didn't reply. She just went on working at the console, muttering to herself. "You're a real son of a bitch, Norman. Do you know that? You feel so terrible that you need to make everybody else just as low as you are." She was talking about herself, he thought. "You're so big on the unconscious, Norman. The unconscious this, the unconscious that. Jesus Christ, I'm sick of you. Your unconscious probably wants to kill us all, just because you want to kill yourself, and you think everybody else should die with you." He felt a shuddering chill. Beth, with her lack of self-esteem, her deep core of self-hate, had gone inside the sphere, and now she was acting with the power of the sphere, but without stability to her thoughts. Beth saw herself as a victim who struggled against her fate, always unsuccessfully. Beth was victimized by men, victimized by the establishment, victimized by research, victimized by reality. In every case, she failed to see how she had done it to herself. And she's put explosives all around the habitat, he thought. "I won't let you do it, Norman. I'm going to stop you before you kill us all." Everything she said was the reverse of the truth. He began to see the pattern now. Beth had figured out how to open the sphere, and she had gone there in secret, because she had always been attracted to power. She always felt she lacked power and needed more. But Beth wasn't prepared to handle power once she had seen it. Beth still saw herself as a victim, so she had to deny that power and arrange to be victimized by it. It was very different from Harry. Harry had denied his fears, and so fearful images had manifested themselves. But Beth denied her power, and so she manifested a churning cloud of formless, uncontrolled power. Harry was a mathematician who lived in a conscious world of abstraction, of equations and thoughts. A concrete form, like a squid, was what Harry feared. But Beth, the zoologist, who dealt every day with animals, creatures she could touch and see, created an abstraction, a power that she could not see or touch, a formless abstract power that was coming to get her. And to defend herself, she had armed the habitat with explosives. It wasn't much of a defense, Norman thought, unless you wanted to secretly kill yourself. The horror of his true predicament became clear to him. "You won't get away with this, Norman. I won't let it happen. Not to me." She was punching keys on the console. What was she planning? What could she do to him? He had to think. Suddenly, the lights in the laboratory went off. A moment later, the big space heater died, the red elements cooling, turning dark. She had shut off the power. With the heater turned off, how long could he last? He took the blankets from her bed, wrapped himself in them. How long without heat? Certainly not 6 hours, he thought grimly. I'm sorry, Norman, but you understand the position I'm in. As long as you're conscious, I'm in danger. Maybe an hour, he thought. Maybe I can last an hour. I'm sorry, Norman, but I have to do this to you. He heard a soft hiss. The alarm on his chest badge began to beep. He looked down at it. Even in the darkness, he could see it was now gray. He knew immediately what had happened. Beth had turned off the air.
Zero 5:35 hours.
Huddled in the darkness, listening to the beep of his alarms and the hiss of the escaping air, the pressure diminishing rapidly. His ears popped, as if he were in an airplane taking off. Do something, he thought, feeling a surge of panic. But there was nothing he could do. He was locked in the upper chamber of the D cylinder. He couldn't get out. Beth had control of the entire facility, and she knew how to run the life support systems. She had shut off his power. She had shut off his heat. And now she had shut off his air. He was trapped. As the pressure fell, the sealed specimen bottles exploded like bombs, shooting fragments of glass across the room. He ducked under the blankets, feeling the glass rip and tug at the cloth. Breathing was harder now. At first he thought it was tension, and then he realized that the air was thinner. He would lose consciousness soon. Do something. He couldn't seem to catch his breath. Do something. But all he could think about was breathing. He needed air, needed oxygen. Then he thought of the first aid cabinet. Wasn't there emergency oxygen in the cabinet? He wasn't sure. He seemed to remember. As he got up, another specimen bottle exploded, and he twisted away from the flying glass. He was gasping for breath, chest heaving. He started to see gray spots before his eyes. He fumbled in the darkness, looking for the cabinet, his hands moving along the wall. He touched the cylinder. Oxygen? No, too large. It must be the fire extinguisher. Where was the cabinet? His hands moved along the wall. Where? He felt the metal case, the embossed cover with the raised cross. He pulled it open, thrust his hand inside. More spots swam before his eyes. There wasn't much time. His fingers touched small bottles, soft bandage packs. There was no air bottle. Damn! The bottles fell to the floor, and then something large and heavy landed on his foot with a thud. He bent down, touched the floor, felt a shard of glass cut his finger, paid no attention. His hand closed over a cold metal cylinder. It was small, hardly longer than the palm of his hand. At one end was a small fitting, a nozzle. It was a spray can. Some kind of damn spray can. He threw it aside. Oxygen. He needed oxygen. By the bed, he remembered. Wasn't there emergency oxygen by every bed in the habitat? He felt for the couch where Beth had slept, felt for the wall above where her head had been. Surely there was oxygen nearby. He was dizzy now. He wasn't thinking clearly. No oxygen. Then he realized this wasn't a regular bed. It wasn't intended for sleeping. They wouldn't have placed any oxygen here. Damn. And then his hand touched the metal cylinder, clipped to the wall. At one end was something soft. Soft. An oxygen mask. Quickly, he pushed the mask over his mouth and nose. He felt the bottle, twisted a knurled knob. He heard a hissing, breathed cold air. He felt a wave of intense dizziness, and then his head cleared. Oxygen. He was fine. He felt the shape of the bottle, gauged its size. It was an emergency bottle, only a few hundred cc's. How long would it last? Not long, he thought. A few minutes. It was only a temporary reprieve. Do something. But he couldn't think of anything to do. He had no options. He was locked in a room. He remembered one of his teachers, fat old Dr. Timken. You always have an option. There's always something you could do. You are never without a choice. I am now, he thought. No choices now. Anyway, Timken had been talking about treating patients, not escaping from sealed chambers. Timken didn't have any experience escaping from sealed chambers, and neither did Norman. The oxygen made him lightheaded. Or was it already running out? He saw a parade of his old teachers before him. Was this like seeing your life running before you died? All his teachers. Mrs. Jefferson, who told him to be a lawyer instead. Old Joe Lampier, who laughed and said, Everything is sex. Trust me, it always comes down to sex. Dr. Sign, who used to say, There is no such thing as a resistant patient. Show me a resistant patient, and I'll show you a resistant therapist. If you're not making headway with a patient, then do something. Do anything else. But do something. Do something. Stein advocated crazy stuff. If you weren't getting through a patient, get crazy. Dress up in a clown suit, kick the patient, squirt him with a water pistol. Do any damn thing that came into your head. But do something. Look, he used to say, what you're doing now isn't working. So you might as well do something else, no matter how crazy it seems. That was fine back then, Norman thought. He'd like to see Stein assess this problem. What would Dr. Stein tell him to do? Open the door. I can't. She's locked it. Talk to her. I can't. She won't listen. Turn on your air. I can't. She has control of the system. Get control of the system. I can't. She's in control. Find help inside the room. I can't. There's nothing left to help me. Then leave. I can't. He paused. That wasn't true. He could leave by smashing a porthole, or, for that matter, by opening the hatch in the ceiling. But there was no place to go. He didn't have a suit. The water was freezing. He had been exposed to that freezing water for only a few seconds, and he had nearly died. If he were to leave the room for the open ocean, he would almost surely die. He'd probably be fatally chilled before the chamber even filled with water. He would surely die. In his mind, he saw Stein raise his bushy eyebrows, give his quizzical smile. So, you'll die anyway. What have you got to lose? A plan began to form in Norman's mind. If he opened the ceiling hatch, he could go outside the habitat. Once outside, perhaps he could make his way down to the A cylinder, get back in through the airlock and put his suit on. Then he would be okay. If he could make it to the airlock, how long would that take? 30 seconds? A minute? Could he hold his breath that long? Could he withstand the cold that long? You'll die anyway. And then he thought, you damn fool, you're holding an oxygen bottle in your hand. You have enough air if you don't stay here, wasting time worrying. Get on with it. No, he thought. There's something else. Something I'm forgetting. Get on with it. So he stopped thinking and climbed up to the ceiling hatch at the top of the cylinder. Then he held his breath, braced himself, and spun the wheel, opening the hatch. Norman! Norman, what are you doing? Norman, you're insane! He heard Beth shout, and then the rest was lost in the roar of freezing water, pouring like a mighty waterfall into the habitat, filling the room. The moment he was outside, he realized his mistake. He needed weights. His body was buoyant, tugging him up towards the surface. He sucked a final breath, dropped the oxygen bottle, and desperately gripped the coal pipes on the outside of the habitat, knowing that if he lost his grip, there would be nothing to stop him, nothing to grab onto, all the way up to the surface. He would reach the surface and explode like a balloon. Holding the pipes, he pulled himself down, hand over hand over hand, looking for the next pipe, the next protrusion to grab. It was like a mountain climb in reverse. If he let go, he would fall upwards and die. His hands were long since numb. His body was stiff with cold, slow with cold. His lungs burned. He had very little time. He reached the bottom, swung under D cylinder, pulled himself along, felt in the darkness for the airlock. It wasn't there. The airlock was gone. Then he saw he was beneath B cylinder. He moved over to A, felt for the airlock. The airlock was closed. He tugged the wheel. It was shut tight. He pulled on it, but he couldn't move it. He was locked out. The most intense fear gripped him. His body was almost immobile from cold. He knew he had only a few seconds of consciousness remaining. He had to open the hatch. He had to open the hatch. He pounded it, pounded the metal around the rim, feeling nothing in his numb hands. The wheel began to spin by itself. The hatch popped open. There must have been an emergency button. He must have. He burst above the surface of the water, gasped air, and sank again. He came back up, but he couldn't climb out of the cylinder. He was too numb, his muscles frozen, his body unresponsive. You have to do it, he thought. You have to do it. His fingers gripped metal, slipped off, gripped again. One pull, he thought. One last pull. He heaved his chest over the metal rim, flopped onto the deck. He couldn't feel anything. He was so cold. He twisted his body, trying to pull his legs up, and fell back into the icy water. No! He pulled himself up again, one last time. Again over the rim, again onto the deck, and he twisted, one leg up, his balance precarious, then the other leg. He couldn't really feel it. And then he was out of the water and lying on the deck. He was shivering. He tried to stand and fell over. His whole body was shaking so hard he couldn't keep his balance. Across the airlock, he saw his suit, hanging on the wall of the cylinder. He saw the helmet, Johnson, stenciled on it. Norman crawled towards the suit, his body shaking violently. He tried to stand and couldn't. The boots of his suit were directly in front of his face. He tried to grip them in his hands, but his hands could not close. He tried to bite the suit, to pull himself up with his teeth, but his teeth were chattering uncontrollably. The intercom crackled. Norman! I know what you're doing, Norman! Any minute, Beth would be here. He had to get into the suit. He stared at it, inches from him, but his hands still shook. He couldn't hold on to anything. Finally, he saw the fabric loops near the waist to the clip instruments. He hooked one hand into the loop, managed to hold on. He pulled himself up. He got one foot into the suit, and then the other. He reached for the helmet. The helmet drummed in a staccato beat against the wall before he managed to get it free of the peg and dropped it over his head. He twisted, heard the click of the snap lock. He was still very cold. Why wasn't the suit heating up? Then he realized no power. The power was in the tank pack. Norman backed up against the wall, shrugged it on, staggering under the weight. He had to hook the umbilicus. He reached behind him, felt it, held it, hooked it into the suit, at the waist. Hook it. He heard a click. The fan hummed. He felt long streaks of pain all over his body. The electrical elements were heating, painful against his frozen skin. He felt pins and needles all over. Beth was talking. He heard her through the intercom, but he couldn't listen to her. He sat heavily on the deck, breathing hard. But he already knew that he was going to be all right. The pain was lessening. His head was clearing, and he was no longer shaking so badly. He had been chilled, but not long enough for it to be central. He was recovering fast. The radio crackled. "You'll never get to me, Norman!" He got to his feet, pulled on his weight belt, locked the buckles. "Norman!" He said nothing. He felt quite warm now, quite normal. "Norman, I am surrounded by explosives. If you come anywhere near me, I will blow you to pieces. You'll die, Norman. You'll never get near me." But Norman wasn't going to Beth. He had another plan entirely. He heard his tank air hiss as the pressure equalized in his suit. He jumped back into the water.
Zero, 500 hours.
The sphere gleamed in the light. Norman saw himself reflected in its perfectly polished surface, then saw his image break up, fragmented on the convolutions, as he moved around to the back, to the door. It looked like a mouth, he thought, like the maw of some primitive creature about to eat him. Confronted by the sphere, seeing once again the alien, inhuman pattern of the convolutions, he felt his intention dissolve. He was suddenly afraid. He didn't think he could go through with it. Don't be silly, he told himself. Harry did it, and Beth did it. They survived. He examined the convolutions, as if for some reassurance. But there wasn't any reassurance to be obtained. Just curved grooves in the metal, reflecting back the light. Okay, he thought, finally. I'll do it. I've come this far. I've survived everything so far. I might as well do it. Go ahead and open up. But the sphere did not open. It remained exactly as it was, a gleaming, polished sphere of metal. What was the purpose of the thing? He wished he understood its purpose. He thought of Dr. Stein again. What was Stein's favorite line? Understanding is a delaying tactic. Stein used to get angry about that. When the graduate students would intellectualize, going on and on about patients and their problems, he would interrupt in annoyance. Who cares whether we understand the psychodynamics in this case? Do you want to understand how to swim, or do you want to jump in and start swimming? Only people who are afraid of the water want to understand it. Other people jump in and get wet. Okay, Norman thought. Let's get wet. He turned to face the sphere and thought, open up. The sphere did not open. Open up, he said aloud. The sphere did not open. Of course he knew that wouldn't work, because Ted had tried it for hours. When Harry and Beth went in, they hadn't said anything. They just did something in their minds. He closed his eyes, focused attention, and thought, "Open up." He opened his eyes and looked at the sphere. It was still closed. "I am ready for you to open up," he thought. "I am ready now." Nothing happened. The sphere did not open. Norman hadn't considered the possibility that he wouldn't be able to open the sphere. After all, 2 others had already done it. How had they managed it? Harry, with his logical brain, he had been the first to figure it out. But Harry had only figured it out after he had seen Beth's tape. So Harry had discovered a clue in the tape, an important clue. Beth had also reviewed the tape, watching it again and again, until she finally figured it out. Something in the tape. Too bad he didn't have the tape here, Norman thought. But he had seen it often. He could probably reconstruct it, play it back in his mind. How did it go? In his mind, he saw the images. Beth and Tina talking. Beth eating cake. Then Tina had said something about the tapes being stored in the submarine. And Beth said something back. Then Tina had moved away, out of the picture, but she had said, "Do you think we'll ever get the sphere open?" And Beth said, "Maybe. I don't know." And the sphere had opened at that moment. Why? "Do you think they'll ever get the sphere open?" Tina had asked. And in response to such a question, Beth must have imagined the sphere open, must have seen an image of the open sphere in her mind. There was a deep, low rumble, a vibration that filled the room. The sphere was open, the door gaping wide and black. That's it, he thought. Visualize it happening, and it happens. Which means that if he also visualized the sphere door closed, with another deep rumble, the sphere closed. Or open. The sphere open again. "I better not press my luck," he said aloud. The door was still open. He peered in the doorway, but saw only deep, undifferentiated blackness. It's now or never, he thought. He stepped inside. The sphere closed behind him.